In this section, we'll look at the Cold War from roughly the Berlin blockade of 1948 through the fall of China in 1949. By the late 1940s, it was becoming pretty obvious that Germany was a problem. In the Potsdam Conference in 1945, the Western Allies and the Soviet Union had agreed to divide Germany into four occupation zones. One for the British, one for the French, one for the Americans, and one for the Soviets. These were not intended to be permanent, but simply to keep order and to bring in needed food and medicine. They also agreed to a four-power occupation of Germany's largest city, Berlin, which just happened to be in the Soviet section. Anyway, by the late 40s, it was becoming obvious that the British, French, and Americans had one idea about what to do with post-war Germany, and the Soviets had another. It was becoming clear that these two parts of Germany might become separate countries. Recognizing this and fearing that the Allies were beginning to unite into a capitalist western section of Germany, Stalin ordered all rail and road lines cut between Berlin and the western sections of Germany. He figured that either they would have to abandon their efforts to form a Western German capitalist nation, or they'd have to simply let the 2 million people under their control in Berlin simply become part of a new East German communist nation. Truman didn't want to abandon Berlin, nor did he want to shoot his way into the city and cause World War III. But he instead came up with another idea. He ordered a massive airlift to provide Berliners with food and fuel necessary for their survival. American C-54 and C-47 cargo planes landed in West Berlin's Tempelhof Airport every 3 minutes around the clock, bringing a mountain of supplies. To prevent the Soviets from shooting down the U.S. planes, Truman hinted that he would use the bomb, quote unquote, if necessary, and ordered a fleet of B-29s, the only planes capable of delivering atomic bombs, to English bases in July 1948. Obviously, tensions were rising. The president confided in his diary, quote, "We are very close to war," unquote. Meanwhile, the Berlin airlift continued to provide the blockade city with a very precarious lifeline. Stalin figured that the American airlift, dubbed by the Americans Operation Vittles, it couldn't succeed. Stalin did what he could to add pressure, cutting power to the Allied portions of Berlin. Planes had to land at night with the lights of jeeps and trucks parked on the tarmac. Finally, after almost a year, in May 1949, the Soviets conceded and ended the blockade. A land route was reestablished between the free portions of Berlin and the western sections of Germany. It was becoming clear that the American, British, and French sections of Germany were uniting into a pro-Western capitalist nation, while the Soviet sections in the eastern part of Germany would become another Eastern Bloc nation. By 1948, it was also clear that the Middle East and the Far East were both areas in which the Cold War would play out. In the Middle East, the problem revolved around the creation of the Jewish nation of Israel. Following the horrors of World War II, the Holocaust and all, the United States promised to support the Jewish quest for a homeland in the Arab-dominated British Protectorate of Palestine. The United Nations approved the creation of both a Jewish state and a new Arab state for the Palestinians. After Israel declared its independence in May 1948, the United States quickly recognized the new nation. The neighboring Arab nations, however, attacked. With American aid, the Israelis won the war by 1949. An armistice agreed to boundaries for Israel and the circling nations, but without a Palestinian homeland, with all the Jewish refugees altering the demographic balance of the area, future conflict appeared inevitable. The U.S. had assured Israel of a strong defensive presence, but the Arab nations enjoyed considerable oil reserves. It appeared an obvious entree for the Soviet Union to win support among the Arab countries, much to the chagrin of the Americans. In short, an ethnic religious struggle centuries old would now play out under the umbrella of the Cold War. In the Far East, the problem was China. During World War II, the Japanese had invaded China, and thus the Americans and the Western Allies had aided the Chinese nationalists, who were led by Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was pro-Western, but was hardly democratic, often brutal in his control, as a matter of fact. By the late 1940s, Chiang Kai-shek faced a rebellion encouraged by the neighboring communists in the Soviet Union. The communists were led by Mao Zedong, who had converted to Marxism in his early 20s and had founded the Communist Party of China in 1921. Mao adopted the peasant attire and promised land reforms, which were popular among many of the Chinese. As Chiang Kai-shek received American aid, the Soviets did the same for Mao, who continued to push southward into the heart of China. Truman tried to broach a compromise, sending George C. Marshall, who again was now Secretary of State, to China, but Chiang Kai-shek refused to have reforms and Mao refused to likewise compromise because he sensed that he was winning. Finally, by 1949, Mao's communists had pushed Chiang Kai-shek's pro-Western nationalists off of mainland China onto the island of Taiwan, which was off China's southeast coast. There, Chiang Kai-shek continued to rule as the Republic of China, claiming all of China. Mao, meanwhile, created a new communist government for mainland China known as the People's Republic of China, or PRC. Chiang Kai-shek still claimed to be the legitimate governor of China, his government, as I say, called the Republic of China, but with both sides claiming to be the legitimate government of all of China, and with each confusing to recognize the other, the world obviously had another flashpoint for the Cold War. While Truman realistically could have done nothing to alter the outcome of the Chinese Revolution, the so-called fall of China demoralized and frightened Americans. The West and the U.S. had enjoyed some success from 1945 through 1948, but the most populous country in the world going communist appeared quite a blow to American hopes, and Truman received a great deal of criticism. He got a lot of political headache for that. In time, tensions would develop between the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, who, unlike Eastern European countries, had no intention of taking orders from Moscow. At the time, however, communism appeared certainly on the ascent. This includes a section on the Cold War from the Berlin blockade of 1948 until the fall of China in 1949.